January is not waiting to see what you will do. It is watching to see what you will allow. Before the year stretches out in front of you with its battles, blessings, delays, and surprises, one moment decides the tone of everything that follows. Most people lose a year before February arrives, not because they failed, but because they entered casually. This message is not for those who want motivation. It is for those who want control over their outcomes. What you do at the gate determines what greets you on the road, and tonight the gate is open. January is not simply the first page on a calendar. It is a spiritual gate, and gates decide what is allowed to enter and what is kept out. In spiritual law, beginnings carry authority. Whatever is established at the start gains legal permission to continue. This is why January has a weight that no other month carries. It is the month where patterns are authorized, atmospheres are legalized, and outcomes are pre-approved. Many people pray harder later in the year, not realizing that they ignored the most powerful moment to speak, act, and align. Heaven watches how you enter a season before it decides how much it will trust you within that season. January is not loud, but it is decisive. Quiet decisions made here echo loudly across the remaining months. Spiritually, January functions like a foundation. A building does not collapse because of weak paint or poor decoration. It collapses because of a faulty foundation. In the same way, many destinies do not fail because of lack of effort later, but because January was treated casually. When foundations are wrong, correction becomes expensive. This is why wisdom insists on early alignment. January carries the power of first mention, and in spiritual systems, the first mention sets precedent. When fear speaks first, struggle feels justified. When faith speaks first, resistance loses authority. What speaks first in January gains influence over February, March, and beyond. January is also a month of instruction. God rarely begins a year with manifestations alone. He begins with directions. Those who rush for results without receiving alignment often work against the flow of the year. January is when heaven releases blueprints, not just blessings. Instructions received here saved years later. Delays that frustrate people mid-year are often consequences of ignored guidance in January. When you align early, you don't fight hard later. Grace is cheapest at the beginning. Correction is gentlest at the start. By the time the year matures, systems are already in motion, and changing direction requires greater force. There is also a warfare dimension to January. The enemy understands beginnings, which is why distractions are strongest early. Fatigue, excuses, emotional noise, and unnecessary busyness often show up aggressively in January, not by accident but by strategy. If focus is broken early, momentum is weakened. Spiritual gates are guarded by attentiveness. When a gate is left unattended, anything can pass through. January demands spiritual alertness, not panic but intentionality. Those who are spiritually lazy at the beginning often become spiritually desperate later. January sets the tone of authority. When you take responsibility early, the year responds differently. Prayer in January is not begging, it is legislating. Decisions made here are not reactions, they are declarations. Faith expressed early becomes confidence later. When you establish spiritual discipline in January, consistency becomes natural instead of forced. This is why some people seem to flow through the year while others struggle from one battle to another. It is really about strength, it is about timing. January is also a seed month. Seeds planted here multiply quietly but powerfully. Small acts of obedience in January carry disproportionate rewards. What looks insignificant now becomes unavoidable later. Heaven magnifies early faithfulness. A little alignment in January can save months of recovery. When you honor the gate, the road opens. When you miss the gate, the journey becomes longer. This is why wise people treat January with reverence, intention, and spiritual seriousness, knowing that what they allow here will speak repeatedly long after the month itself has passed into history. Miracles are often misunderstood because people see the results but ignore the process that authorized it. In truth, miracles are not random interruptions of natural order. They are deliberate responses to spiritual conditions. Heaven does not act arbitrarily. Every genuine miracle is a reply to something: faith, alignment, obedience, sacrifice, hunger, or covenant understanding. When people call miracles accidents, they unknowingly reduce God to chance, but God is intentional, precise, and lawful. What looks sudden to people is usually the outcome of invisible spiritual transactions that have been building over time. In spiritual systems, response follows signal. Just as a microphone responds only when sound is released, miracles respond when the right spiritual signal is sent. Faith is one of the strongest signals, not emotional excitement, but conviction rooted in truth. Many people desire miracles, but emit signals of fear, doubt, and inconsistency. Heaven does not respond to need alone, it responds to alignment. Need may attract mercy, but alignment releases power. This is why two people can be in the same service, hear the same word, and experience different outcomes. The difference is not God's willingness, it is the condition of response. Miracles also respond to obedience. Obedience is not passive compliance, it is active agreement with divine instruction. When God gives an instruction, it carries power within it, but that power remains dormant until obedience activates it. Many miracles in scripture were not dramatic until someone acted. Divine reset and realignment is the merciful intervention of God to restore order where disorder has quietly taken over. Life has a way of drifting. When seasons change, pressures increase, and decisions accumulate without proper spiritual oversight. Over time, misalignment does not always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes it settles in subtly, appearing as delay, confusion, emotional fatigue, or repeated cycles that seem difficult to explain. A reset is not punishment, it is proof that God is still invested enough to interrupt what is no longer serving his purpose. Realignment begins with perspective. When God resets a person, he first corrects how they see, not what they have. Many people pray for change while still interpreting life through outdated lenses. They judge new seasons with old assumptions and measure fresh instructions using past disappointments. A divine reset shifts interpretation. Suddenly, what once looked like loss is understood as protection. What felt like delay is revealed as preparation. This internal correction is critical because God rarely rearranges circumstances without first recalibrating understanding. When perspective changes, decisions follow naturally and movement becomes effortless. A reset also addresses misplaced priorities. Over time, good things can quietly replace essential things. Activity can replace intimacy. Routine can replace discernment, and familiarity can replace reverence. When this happens, progress continues outwardly while alignment deteriorates inwardly. Divine realignment restores order by bringing what matters most back to its rightful place. This process often feels uncomfortable because it confronts attachments, habits, and relationships that once seemed harmless. Yet discomfort is often the prophetic instructions are not ordinary words. They are vessels of power designed to unlock what prayer alone cannot access. Many people pray sincerely yet remain stuck because they overlook the role of obedience in activating spiritual authority. Instruction is heaven's method of transferring responsibility. When God gives an instruction, he is not merely giving direction, he is granting permission for results to manifest. The instruction carries within it the power needed for its own fulfillment, but that power remains inactive until the human will cooperates. Every major breakthrough in scripture was preceded by a specific instruction. The instruction often looked unrelated to the result, sometimes even illogical. This is intentional. God designs prophetic instructions to bypass human pride and test alignment. If instructions made sense naturally, obedience would be based on reasoning rather than trust. The power is not in understanding the instruction, it is in honoring its source. When obedience is selective, access becomes limited. Heaven responds fully only to complete alignment. Prophetic instructions also serve as spiritual keys. Keys are small, but they control access to large spaces. In the same way, a simple directive can open doors that years of effort could not force. Many people search for complex answers to simple problems, not realizing that one overlooked instruction is standing between them and their breakthrough. What appears minor in form often carries major authority in function. The tragedy is not lack of instruction, but lack of sensitivity. God speaks, but familiarity dulls discernment, and impatience rushes people ahead of clarity. Instructions are time-bound. Obedience delayed is often obedience denied. There are moments when a directive is effective only within a specific window. When that window closes, the instruction may remain true, but the opportunity attached to it shifts. This is why prompt obedience is emphasized in spiritual growth. Speed is not recklessness, it is honor. When God sees swift response, he entrusts greater responsibility. Delay communicates doubt, fear, or over-dependence on logic. Each delayed instruction weakens momentum and invites unnecessary resistance. Prophetic instructions also protect. Sometimes what God instructs is not about immediate reward, but about preservation. Many battles are avoided, not fought, because someone obeyed an instruction that seemed inconvenient at the time. What later looks like favor was often obedience in disguise. Protection is one of the quietest miracles, and it is usually the reward of listening well. Disasters that never happened rarely get testimonies, yet they are among the greatest evidences of divine guidance. Obedience to instruction reshapes character. It trains humility, patience, and discernment. When people obey even when it costs comfort, they grow in spiritual authority. Authority is not given to the loudest voices, but to the most aligned lives. Each instruction obeyed increases capacity for greater revelation. Disobedience, on the other hand, hardens the heart gradually. It rarely begins with rebellion, but with small justifications. Over time, sensitivity is lost, and instructions become background noise instead of divine direction. Prophetic instructions demand faith because they often require movement before clarity. God rarely explains everything in advance. He reveals enough to require trust, then waits for action before unveiling the next step. This keeps the relationship dynamic. Those who insist on full explanation before obedience limit their progress. Faith grows by responding to what is revealed, not waiting for what is concealed. When prophetic instructions are honored, access is unlocked. Those respond, resistance weakens, and pathways appear where none existed. The result is not just a miracle, but mastery over seasons. A life guided by instruction flows with divine timing rather than human struggle. This is why instruction is more valuable than information, and alignment more powerful than effort. Faith is not a passive belief system. It is a force that must be activated, and timing determines its effectiveness. Early faith carries a different authority than delayed faith, because faith works best when momentum is still unchallenged. At the beginning of a season, systems are fluid, resistance is unorganized, and outcomes are still negotiable. This is why faith expressed early has leverage. When faith waits too long, it is often forced to fight structures that have already been established by fear, habit, or prior assumptions. Early activation is not about intensity alone. It is about positioning before opposition settles in. Many people believe in God sincerely, but postpone faith-based actions, waiting to see how things go. This mindset quietly weakens spiritual momentum. Faith that waits for evidence is no longer faith, it is reaction. Early faith speaks before results appear, not because the believer is careless, but because faith understands spiritual law. In the realm of the spirit, what is spoken and acted upon first often gains authority. When fear speaks first, it frames expectations. When faith speaks first, it defines boundaries. Silence at the beginning is rarely neutral. It is often permission for doubt to take the lead. Activating faith early trains the heart to trust before pressure arrives. Later in the year, challenges feel heavier, not because they are stronger, but because internal confidence was never established. Early faith builds internal certainty that carries a person through complex moments. It anchors the mind before confusion tries to take over. People who delay faith often find themselves trying to generate courage in crisis, which is far more difficult than sustaining courage that was established in peace. Faith is strongest when it is planted before storms, not during them. There is also a spiritual speed attached to early faith. When faith is activated quickly, grace responds quickly. Delay in faith creates delay in manifestation, not because God is slow, but because spiritual systems respond to signals. Early faith signals readiness, trust, and alignment. Heaven responds to preparedness. When someone moves early, doors align, helpers locate them faster, and resistance loses confidence. Late faith often meets locked doors, not because they were meant to stay closed, but because timing was ignored. Early faith also protects against discouragement. When faith is activated from the start, expectations are set correctly. The believer is not shocked by process, delays, or opposition, because faith already accounted for growth. Those who delay faith often enter the journey emotionally unprepared. When results take time, they interpret it as failure rather than formation. Early faith understands that manifestation has stages. It remains steady because it was not rushed into belief by desperation. It was established intentional. Faith activated early also shapes discipline. When belief is strong at the beginning, consistency becomes easier. Prayer, obedience, and focus flow naturally instead of being forced by fear later. Many people attempt to repair spiritual discipline mid-year when things begin to fall apart, not realizing that discipline is easier to maintain than to rebuild. Early faith builds habits that sustain strength. Late faith tries to fix damage rather than prevent it. There is a psychological dimension as well. The mind believes what it practices repeatedly. Early faith programs the mind with expectancy and confidence. Delayed faith allows negative narratives to rehearse unchecked. By the time faith is attempted, the mind has already accepted limitation as normal. Early faith interrupts this process. It establishes a dominant narrative before alternative voices gain volume. This is why declarations, decisions, and commitments made early carry disproportionate power. Faith that is activated early does not eliminate challenges, but it reduces their authority. Problems still arise, but they do not define direction. The believer moves with clarity rather than panic. Early faith does not guarantee ease, but it guarantees alignment. Alignment attracts assistance, clarity, and strength long before results are visible. January operates like a spiritual field where seeds determine harvest long before results become visible. What is planted early gains time, depth, and advantage. In spiritual economics, timing is as powerful as substance. A seed planted in January has the entire year to mature, strengthen, and multiply. This is why actions taken at the beginning of a year carry disproportionate influence over outcomes at the end. Many people focus on December rewards without realizing that December only reveals what January authorized. The harvest never negotiates with effort made later if early investment was ignored. Seeds are not limited to money. They include decisions, disciplines, attitudes, words, sacrifices, and priorities. Every intentional act in January functions as a deposit into the future. Small choices made early compound quietly. A habit formed in January rarely feels significant, but by December it has either built strength or created limitation. People often underestimate beginnings because results are invisible at first, yet invisibility does not mean inactivity. Seeds work underground long before they break the surface. January seeds benefit from spiritual tension. At the start of the year, focus is sharper, resistance is weaker, and direction is clearer. This environment allows seeds to take root without competition. When seeds are planted later, they must fight through established weeds of distraction, fatigue, and disappointment. Early planting avoids unnecessary struggle. Wisdom understands that ease later is often purchased by discipline earlier. When people complain about exhaustion at the end of the year, they are often feeling the weight of neglected beginnings. There is also a law of consistency attached to January seeds. What you plant early invites repetition. A prayer routine started in January becomes normal by March. A mindset chosen early becomes identity by mid-year. Conversely, neglect at the beginning becomes a pattern that is difficult to break later. Patterns are stronger than intentions. January establishes patterns, and patterns carry momentum. Once momentum is formed, change requires effort. This is why January is not the month to drift, it is the month to decide. Seeds planted in January also attract alignment. When a person invests early, opportunities recognize commitment. Help us locate those who are already moving. Favor often responds to motion, not desire. Early obedience creates spiritual visibility. Heaven notices who takes beginning seriously and entrusts them with greater responsibility. Delay often signals indecision, and indecision limits trust. January seeds communicate readiness. There is a spiritual law of multiplication that favors early sowing. Time itself becomes a multiplier. A small seed with more time can outperform a larger seed with less time. This is why late efforts often feel heavier. They are trying to compress growth into a shorter window. January gives margin. It allows room for correction, learning, and strengthening. Mistakes made early can be adjusted. Mistakes made late are costly. Early seeds allow grace to work patiently. Emotionally, January seeds build confidence. When you know you invested early, you carry peace through the year. You are not rushing, scrambling, or forcing outcomes. This internal stability affects decisions.
Calm people choose better. Rush people compromise. Early investment removes pressure. Pressure is often the result of procrastination, not destiny. When foundations are secure, progress feels natural.
January seeds also determine spiritual authority. Those who sow early speak with confidence later. Testimonies in December are often the echoes of obedience in January. People admire results without seeing the discipline that produced them. Harvest is never accidental. It is always the outcome of alignment, timing, and consistency. Those who understand this treat January as sacred ground. When January is honored, December becomes predictable, not in detail but in direction. The year responds to how it was entered. What you plant at the gate controls what greets you at the end. Early seeds do not guarantee perfection, but they secure advantage. Advantage is what separates struggle from progress and reaction from mastery. As you step forward from this moment, understand that something has already shifted. You did not just listen to words, you aligned with direction. The year ahead will respond to the decisions you make now, not the excuses you leave behind. What once resisted you will recognize a new authority, and what delayed you will begin to move. Carry this consciousness into every step, every choice, every prayer. You are not chasing the year is responding to you. Enter with confidence, walk with clarity, and let your alignment speak louder than effort.